agriculture, fisheries, livestock, and cooperatives. That's Peter Munya to speak with us. Thank you, sir, for making time for the big story. Let's begin with perhaps paint for us a picture, because there's been a lot said. We're now talking about at least 18 counties affected by this invasion, that FAO was talking about 75% of the country in terms of the destruction that has been witnessed. I wonder, from the vantage position you sit heading the ministry and, of course, getting all of the details from various stakeholders, can you paint for us a picture of what we are looking at?
Well, yes, it's true that, locusts have been able to be spotted in 18 counties. But, of course, the damage to crops is not at the same level. Most of the counties is in northern Kenya. So the damage is largely pasture and, vegetation. We've not been able to do the assessment yet in terms of the quantities, quantifying what is damage. We have appointed a rapid assessment team, and we want to pick many people to go and do the assessment so that we have a quick report very quickly. We don't want to pick one consultant. We want to pick institutions that are able to do assessment quickly. They do it. But we've been able to contain the situation in terms of the first wave of locusts. Right now, no swarms are coming into the country for the last 1 week. We've been able to do a lot of spraying and destruction of the original swarms that came. And some of what you are seeing, especially in the food basket areas, are splinter swarms of those original swarms that came, that are the last stage of their life cycle. What is, for example, has been in Kirinyaga, Mukurweini, Embu, could even be 1 or 2 swarms moving, because these insects keep moving. So you see one here, it moves to another. You may think you are seeing many, but it could be 1 or 2 moving to different locations. So in our assessment, because I was this weekend, the Isiolo, Samburu, Marsabit, I can tell you that the situation is under control right now, because most of those huge swarms that came, we've been able to spray them. They are so those eggs are now hatching, because swarms, the locusts have a lifespan of around three months. So we have eggs laid across the country in those areas. Luckily, we have trained people in all the counties to monitor and map those areas where those eggs are laid. We have now trained NYS teams and the county teams that are on the ground now spraying where the eggs have hatched. We have hatchings in some counties, for example, in Garissa, in Samburu, in Isiolo. Those ones we have hatchings that are already on the ground. And we have teams from NYS and counties that are already spraying to make sure that we don't have now a first generation, because that would be a first generation in the country, because those who are from outside the country. So we are preparing to deal with that first generation and also deal with other swarms that may come from those other countries where these ones came, where they also laid the eggs, and therefore swarms would come into the country. We have mobilized resources. We are stockpiling chemicals. We are increasing our aerial coverage to 20 planes that we will station along the front line, even as we also spray any remnants of the hatchlings that may mature into adulthood. So we are properly prepared. We have also support, from development partners who have the expertise. We have also internal capacity here. We have grouped the country, the country, we put it into 6 regions, and we have put ground teams and the units in those 6 regions with equipment, and we have a central command here in the ministry, and we have also a ground command in Isiolo.
Okay. So clearly,
the defense forces involved with planes also working with us. So right now I can tell you there is no new swarm in Garissa, there is no new swarm in Wajir, there is no new swarm in Marsabit. The swarms that was Marsabit were also some that survived moved, others were sprayed, they died. The real epicenter for those hatchlings is Samburu, Isiolo, Garissa, and a bit of Kitui.
Okay. So to my understanding, sir, is that definitely what you're describing a complicated scenario, because first you have these swarms that have come in, but you say no more swarms have come in terms of this desert locusts in the past week, and then there's the laying of eggs. But I'd ask you to speak to an issue, because you remember your predecessor unfortunately becoming a laughingstock in the country when he talked about Kenyans taking pictures and posting them to find out if indeed they're locusts. And recently when you talked about that the locusts that are in the country, these desert locusts, and the menace they are causing should not cause worry because they will die of old age, some wondered what you meant, and was this backed scientifically? Would you care to shed light on that?
I think the statement I made was taken out of context because I was addressing a specific situation in Igoji, in Meru, and I was addressing locals who are distressed by the locusts that were there. And I was referring to the life cycle of locusts, and I've told you it's around 3 months, the life cycle. Now, remember, those that came were not at the upper stage, which is the first stage. They are not just hatched, they were already early adults. So 2 months, if you look at when locusts started arriving here in January, some in December, you can see already the life cycle. So given that no new swarms are coming, what you are seeing, what we saw in Igoji, were those locusts that are the last stage, that are, past maturity, that they are desperate to lay eggs as they complete their life cycle, so that they can have, we can have hatchings. So that's what I was referring to. And at that stage, they do very little damage in terms of eating, because their preoccupation is perpetuation, self-perpetuation by laying eggs. And if you were there with me, and I was there with experts who are telling me exactly what the situation is, those locusts were high on the trees, they are just resting. Normally when they're in the active stage, they don't rest during the day. That's when they are moving and eating. When they land, they eat. They move again, land, and eat. Those ones who are docile, sitting on top of trees, and already laying eggs. We could see eggs falling. We could even see some of them, because they are looking for a suitable, conducive environment where they can lay eggs. And usually it's those sandy soils where they dig and push the eggs there. Looking at Igoji is high in the islands. It's not a conducive environment. So that's the context within which I was speaking. And indeed, even looking at some of the swarms, a small swarm that has been reported in Mukurweni, looking at the pictures, they are also yellow. Again, they are in that last stage.
Okay. So then speak to me, sir, about then the 2 main concerns. One being these eggs that have been hatched, that they are reproducing. The capacity you have, because I had about 600 NYS officers had been trained. So if you're looking at 18 counties where these locusts have been to and perhaps been hatching everywhere, do you have the capacity to ensure that those eggs are destroyed before this becomes a whole other bigger problem in the next month or 2?
We have put all the contingent measures. Even the numbers we are picking are numbers advised by experts who are involved. And we are also monitoring the situation on a daily basis. Even my travel across the country was part of monitoring. I was not just on my own. I was with the FAO officials and the crop protection officers and the county teams. The trainees from NYS are part of it. We have trained 21 counties. So each county has also its own unit. And we are asking counties also to come on board properly, bring people to be trained to support this exercise. Remember, this is not just a national government doing it, is a stakeholder engagement. Counties are part of it. Agriculture is devolved. So we are giving the general support. We are also giving equipment. We are giving chemicals. We have given the personnel. We are able to provide. We think the numbers we have can contain the situation. If need be, we can also expand.
Yeah.
But remember, we are also expanding the aerial spraying.
Yes.
That's why we have increased the planes from 8 to 20. Right now, the procurement process is going on with the FAO doing the direct procurement to avoid the long processes in government, so that they can procure on our behalf, to make sure that as we clear those hatchlings, as we spray them on the ground, if some survive to reach the age of flying, we have the planes ready to clear them.
So then
You need to also know that in some of the areas where we have, like where I was in Igoji or Mukoroini, you can't do aerial spraying. And that's the conversation I was having with the community there, which was misunderstood. You can only spray them on the ground because you have to localize them. You avoid spraying families, livestock, because it's a highly populated area. So I was giving them options. I was telling them spraying up there will not be good. And I was telling them, don't be too distressed, because these ones, in the stage they are in, they are not very harmful, and they are going to eventually die off.
So then what about...
And then I was, of course, telling them, if they were somewhere safe, we could still spray them to quicken the exit. But we couldn't at that stage.
So
and
let
they
me...
were not on the ground, because you can also spray them in clusters on the ground if you can locate them.
Let me jump in with the other than measure around. You talked about they had come from the region. The Horn of Africa has been worst affected by this desert locust. So that there are these measures happening here at home, but to the extent of the region, and there's the efforts and measures you're putting in place, but there's only so much you can do to control what other countries are doing and the measures they're putting in place. So what kind of regional cooperation is happening, if at all, to ensure that there's a looking out for each other? Because clearly then one problem affects not only Kenya, it goes on to the region and perhaps even farther wide.
Yes, it did. The solution is always regional, because you would rather contain these pests at the source. Because if you contain them at the source, before they spread everywhere, it's easier to contain them. And that's how they have been contained over the years. The trouble is, in those regions we are talking about, there are no functional governments, like in Yemen, in Somalia. Even when you call them in a meeting and work with them, they are not that committed into working with you. There was an IGAD meeting in Addis 2 weeks ago that was addressing locusts. But the commitment we got from those countries were not commitment we can rely on. So we hope, of course, at the UN level, they can be brought to book. And some of the areas where Kenya would even move across and spray is insecure. So it's very difficult to carry out regional containment measures because of lack of civil authority in some of those areas. What we can promise is what we can do here, and I believe from what we have done so far, we can contain the situation. Of course, there has been some damage, but going around that damage is also a bit of exaggeration.
But still, the issue is because you don't have the numbers yet as a ministry of the damage.
You see, I've been traveling, luckily, and I'm saying this with all the knowledge I have, in the food areas. A lot of the locusts came when people were already harvesting. These locusts destroy vegetation that is green. They don't consume cereals. They deal with only green now. That's why there is quite some damage in the pasture areas, because it was raining and it's green. In some food areas, when they arrived, there was already some harvesting going on. I'm not saying there is no damage. I'm saying depending on when they arrive, the damage. For example, if these hatchlings were allowed to go to adult and start now spreading, because when they go adult, they will become swarms. And we have just planted and the food is growing. That very early, when it is green, the damage would be terrible. Now, we are sending assessment, and we believe we are able to raise enough resources to support livelihoods that have been damaged, affected by the locust. So we don't want to spread panic.
Yeah, exactly, because that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to come to. Because remember, some of these regions, we've come from a long drought, so already the farmers there had been suffering, and then come the locusts, for some wiping out their fields. So that the concern has been in terms of food security, and even going forward in as far as food prices. Should we start bracing ourselves for tough times ahead?
As I said, a lot of the damage is in pastoral areas. The damage.
Although they are moving, they're spreading. We're now hearing them in different parts. When it started, it was just up north. It's now coming down.
I want really to be, because I want to state facts. Yeah. The areas we are mentioning, a lot of those locusts that have been spotted there are small swarms that are at that stage where they are inactive. They are not very active. I'm not saying they don't cause damage. They do, and we will do assessment, and we will support every Kenyan who will be affected. Already we are mobilizing resources. 2 weeks, we are sending out teams. We want to bring in Kipra. We want to bring in Tegemeo. We want to bring in Red Cross. We don't want to give one team, because we want to do rapid assessment across the country. We want to bring all the agencies in this country that are specialized in assessment. Once we get the complete picture, we will quickly mobilize resources to start supporting livelihoods. Yeah. Remember, within government, there is also always contingency in terms of emergencies, and this is one of the emergencies. Droughts come as emergencies. Locusts also an emergency. It's the situation in their own. It's not like government here just kept quiet and locusts came. There's nothing we could do from those countries where there is no civil authorities to manage the situation. So we have been instructed. The president has been himself very personally involved. He has been telling us we need to do assessment, so let us not panic. There is always also a silver lining in a situation like this, where we have managed to develop our own capacity. We have learned from this challenge in the future, so that we are prepared for it. So, of course, it is disheartening in terms of those who have suffered, but it also has helped us as a country to learn to manage emergencies, especially emergencies that are not regular, like locust invasion. Okay. So other countries are now asking us what to do. In fact, the planes that are spraying in Turkana are crossing over and spraying in Uganda. Because it's a regional problem. Okay. Ugandans are asking us, can we support you to finish before they come to us? So it's a learning experience. It has helped us also to accumulate experience for the future. But we want to assure Kenyans, and we continue
that's the assurance I'm asking finally, that in terms of food security, in terms of the food prices, FAO had warned of a potential humanitarian crisis. Can you confidently, as Minister for Agriculture, tell us this evening that Kenya does not risk any of this in coming days off of this invasion? Briefly, please.
We are very confident that we don't risk a food crisis. We have put in contingency measures. We are sending in a rapid assessment team to give us a report, so that we mobilize the resources to support the livelihoods that are affected. We are starting a sensitization program. In fact, next week, we are calling all the CECs and everybody to mobilize the public, to sensitize the public, because sometimes lack of information is part of the problem. We are doing that. And then in 2 weeks' time, the rapid assessment team will be in the field doing the assessment, so that we can now start supporting the affected families.
Okay. Thank you very much for making time for us. Cabinet Secretary Peter Munya, in charge of agriculture, fisheries, livestock and cooperatives, and I understand blue economy as well is under his docket, talking to us this evening and expressing confidence that all is being put in place, all measures, all hands are on deck, and that in fact in coming days this should be an issue that should be handled, and there's that cooperation along the various stakeholders in the country. But also there will be, as he has mentioned, they're raising awareness across the country as far as what individuals, counties, as agriculture as a devolved function as well, can get involved and help out with this situation. Jesse.
All right, many thanks, Sophia Wanuna. Definitely all hands are on deck, according to Cabinet Secretary Peter Munya. It definitely is a regional problem, but Kenya is doing as much as possible. He's mentioned the rapid response team and sensitization campaign, which will go hand in eradicating this locust invasion. So without much ado, let me just cross over back to a guest in studio. I'd earlier hinted who's joining us, one Dr. George Ongamo, who's the head of the Insect Science School of Biological Sciences in the University of Nairobi. Thank you so much for making time once again. We're also joined by Okisegere Ojepat, who's the CEO of Fresh Produce Kenya. Allow me to start with you, Mr. Ojepat. We've just heard from the Cabinet Secretary. There doesn't seem to be any cause of alarming when it comes to food insecurity. What's your take on this? Because he mentioned most of the affected regions seem to be pastoralist regions. Do you concur with this?
Thank you, Jesse. The first thing I'll need us to look at here as a country is we need to agree that we, first of all, have a challenge in the country. And locust is not something we want to play around with. So we must applaud government for the efforts so far put in place and the support we've got from the international community. In terms of the panic is real. We have just come from the Lower Eastern, and the discussion there is what are we going to eat because we now have vegetation coming. We can do better. What I will want to quickly urge is that we need to work very closely together, get the private sector, get the international community. Let's get very proactive to ensure that we contain the situation, because when it comes to food, it's not something we negotiate. Each one of us has to have a meal. And for us in the fresh produce industry, it's about business, it's about safe trade, it's about commitments that we've made out there in terms of the exports, the commitment we've made internally. We must supply the country with food, and we have always remained food insecure as a country. So even the little we have, we must ensure that we preserve. So I will really want to look at how quickly we can work together as a country, look at the private sector, and I really want to see how the involvement of all the service providers, the government has trained, private sector has trained so many service providers, so many sprayers, so many people with equipment. I think it's important that we quickly support government in this area. And I'm happy that the Cabinet Secretary has talked about the direct procurement of pesticides, the direct procurement of equipment. It's important that that process is fast-tracked. But I also think it's important that we quickly get information from the counties that have not been affected. The food basket needs to come out quickly. We need to mobilize everything possible to ensure that we communicate. So for now, I am a worried person from where we sit.
Okay.
We, however, have to really ensure that we engage quickly. And there's no time for me, it's not about who is doing what where. It's about how quickly can we be coordinated to ensure that we contain this situation for now.
All right, Ojepat, thank you for that. Yes, we are worried a lot, and I'm sure many Kenyans agree with that. Let's just cross over to Dr. George Ongamo. Brief remarks. We've had so many myths and misconceptions about, where exactly they're from. And kindly debunk this for us. Why are the locusts swarming in large numbers at this year in particular? Because over 70 years, we've never seen such a scourge like this in East Africa, particularly Kenya. Why now? And what's the factor in terms of wind direction? Because we also hear some talk about that.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to debunk some of the things that people have been talking about. If you can remember, in 2018, there were 2 cyclones that were recorded in the Indian Ocean in the month of May and October. This ended up in good rainfalls in Arabian Peninsula, where the desert locusts are known to exist as a recession zone. This good condition ended up favoring the multiplication of desert locusts in this area. And before people realized, there were several generations that emerged in this area. Some moved to the north and some moved to the south. The swarms that moved to the south ended up in Yemen. As the ECS has said, Yemen, there's no good structure to suppress populations here. But before people knew it, these individuals that propagated in Yemen crossed over to Ethiopia and Somalia. In Somalia, these are also known to be summer breeding zones. And before people realized, the population went beyond unimaginable levels. And these are the individuals that finally crossed into Kenya. Now, these insects are known to fly with the help of wind. They are poor flyers. So during this time, the winds were flowing towards the south, and this favored their movement in this area. But now, given that they were breeding a lot in Somalia and Ethiopia, they had to come into the country to get the fresh vegetation that favored their survival. And that's how we ended up with a lot of swarms that have come into the country. And in terms of the management, the government and the team that was deployed on the ground have done a wonderful job.
Dr. George Ongamo, we'll definitely get to talk about the deployment of teams on the ground, and we'll obviously focus on this factor of yellow pigmentation and the life cycle, not forgetting the issue of food insecurity and that looming crisis, because it's a regional problem. So do stay with Big Story. Let's take a short break right now. We'll be back with more information on this locust invasion. Stay with us.
This is KTN News.
Hiyo ndege venye ilianza kupanda, masikio inajifunga na uwezi ambia pilot ashukishe.
Enjoy, good luck.
Mimi kitu iliniboni chakula, ni chakula jazoea.
Kujeruhi.